The foods that truly prepared people keep stocked are never the ones trending online, and by the time most people figure that out, the shelves are already bare. Every time a crisis hits, the same thing happens. People flood stores, they grab the same items, they think identically. And that sameness is exactly what leaves them empty-handed. The people who never go without are not buying what is popular. They are holding on to what most others walk right past. This list is not for everyone. It is for those who want to understand before the moment arrives. And there is one item here that almost nobody considers until it is far too late. Item number 7. You pass it every single day without a second thought. It does not look impressive. It does not feel essential. But when a hard stretch drags on for weeks, this item becomes the line between staying fed and quietly skipping meals. The dangerous part is that you will not feel how badly you needed it until you are already on the wrong side of that line. 12. White rice. Have you ever noticed that in every major disruption, rice is the very first thing to vanish from shelves? Not meat, not canned goods, not snacks, plain, boring white rice. That is not random. When life becomes unstable, people stop looking for variety and start hunting for one thing: reliable energy. Rice answers that call faster than almost anything else. But here is the truth that catches people off guard. Owning rice does not mean you are prepared. You can have a pantry stacked floor to ceiling with it and still find yourself going hungry. Not because you lack food, because you misunderstood what you were actually storing. Thousands of years ago, along the Yangtze and Ganges rivers, ancient communities did not survive floods and famines simply by growing large amounts of rice. They survived because they had learned to keep it through those disasters. There were villages that lost everything after a single catastrophic season, and there were families who sustained themselves through years of hardship because they had mastered the art of sealing rice away from air and moisture. Those reserves did not just feed one person, they carried entire communities through generations. The gap between those who lasted and those who did not was not about how much rice they had. It was about how well they preserved what they owned. Back to today. White rice delivers roughly 360 to 370 calories per 100 grams, almost entirely from carbohydrates, which means fast, dependable energy, exactly what the body craves under prolonged pressure. But rice contains almost no fat, very little protein, and barely any of the micronutrients your body needs to function properly over time. If you rely on rice alone for weeks, your body will begin to decline long before you register what is happening. You will have enough calories to feel like you are eating, but not enough nutrition to stay strong. That is the trap most people walk straight into. In standard packaging, white rice lasts roughly 6 months to a year before air and humidity begin to degrade it. Remove the oxygen, keep it sealed and completely dry, and that same rice can still be good 25 to 30 years from now. The product does not change, the storage method does. Rice can be cooked into full meals, softened into porridge for easy digestion during illness, dry roasted and eaten directly in extreme situations, or combined with legumes to build a far more complete nutritional profile. Most cultures that have relied on rice for centuries have always paired it with something else, because history already taught them that rice alone was never enough. If tomorrow the power goes out, clean water disappears, and every store nearby locks its doors, do you actually trust that bag of rice sitting in your kitchen? Because depending on how it is stored, it will either last 3 months or 30 years. During the early months of the COVID pandemic, rice did not run out in warehouses. Stores just emptied. Not because of supply failure, because people had not prepared the right way. Those who arrived late were not slower. They just did not understand the rules of the game. What separates survival from struggle is not owning rice. It is keeping it in a state that is actually usable when everything around you stops working. Once you understand that, you stop preparing like the crowd. You start thinking the way people who have survived for thousands of years already thought. 11. Dried beans, chickpeas, and lentils. Rice might keep you from starving through the first 30 days. But if the situation stretches to 90 days, what determines whether you still have the strength to function is beans. This is not a modern idea. Over 8,000 years ago, near the Euphrates River in the ancient Middle East, a prolonged drought devastated the wheat harvest. Families who depended entirely on grain began to weaken rapidly. They still had food, but they no longer had the strength to work, to search, to survive much longer. There was a smaller group in that community who kept dried beans from the previous growing season. At first they cooked them the usual way, but as food grew scarce, they shifted their approach. They soaked the beans overnight and let them begin to sprout before eating. What came out was something different from what went in. Softer, more digestible, and the people eating them did not weaken the way the others did. They held their energy. They kept working. They kept looking. None of them knew about protein science or vitamin chemistry, but they understood one practical thing. This food kept them upright. We are repeating an ancient mistake in a modern setting. We pack away what fills the stomach and ignore what sustains the body over a long stretch. That is where legumes become critical. Dried beans are not just a food source. They are one of the only foods that can be activated. You can cook them, grind them into flour, or bring them back to biological life. When beans sprout, their nutritional profile shifts in a meaningful way. They begin generating vitamins, including vitamin C, something almost absent from most shelf-stable foods. From the same stored supply, you are producing new nutrition without adding a single outside ingredient. That changes the mathematics of long-term survival entirely. In proper storage conditions, dried beans can remain viable for 10 to 30 years, but unlike most other shelf-stable foods, they do not simply sit there losing quality. They can still sprout. They can still grow. You are not just storing food, you are storing the capacity to generate food. When you are stockpiling, you are always counting down. When you can transform what you have, you start counting up. Would you rather have a reserve that is steadily shrinking or something that keeps producing value on its own? 10. Animal fat, lard, and beef tallow. Most people preparing for hard times are making one very fundamental error. They are afraid of fat. Decades of dietary messaging have drilled into people that fat is something to eliminate. But in a real, sustained survival situation, fat is what keeps the engine running. This is not opinion. It is physiology. 1 gram of fat delivers approximately 9 calories, nearly double what the same weight of carbohydrates provides. A small quantity of animal fat can sustain your energy far longer than a much larger portion of rice or instant noodles. Long before industrial seed oils existed, animal fat was the primary energy currency of human survival. Medieval European communities, nomadic tribes crossing harsh terrain, polar explorers, none of them survived on lean meals. They survived because they prioritized dense caloric sources. The communities that endured brutal winters and long journeys were not the ones eating by modern nutritional guidelines. They were the ones who understood that concentrated energy is what keeps you moving when conditions deteriorate. Lard and beef tallow, stored in sealed containers away from light and heat, can last anywhere from 1 to 3 years without refrigeration. In some historical preservation methods, animal fat lasted even longer. Beyond energy, fat makes otherwise bland or difficult foods far more palatable and digestible. It helps carry fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K that your body cannot absorb effectively without it. And there is a psychological dimension that matters more than people admit. Eating food that actually tastes like something, that feels satisfying, is what keeps morale stable over a long stretch of difficult days. Do not prepare a supply you cannot stand to eat. 9. Rolled oats. Here is a question worth sitting with. If you had to feed yourself for an entire month on a single food that was cheap, easy to store, and flexible enough to eat multiple ways, what would you reach for? Most people would say rice. But rolled oats deserve that answer at least as much, and for reasons that most people have never thought through. Oats have sustained populations through some of history's hardest periods. During the Scottish Highland famines of the 18th century, entire communities survived for extended periods primarily on oats. They were not eating them out of preference. They were eating them because oats delivered what people needed: staying energy that did not spike and crash, enough protein to keep muscles functioning, and fiber that kept digestion healthy even when everything else about daily life had broken down. Per 100 grams, rolled oats deliver roughly 380 calories, about 13 grams of protein, and a significant amount of soluble fiber. That fiber matters enormously over time. In crisis conditions, digestive problems are common. Stress, limited food variety, contaminated water, all of it affects the gut. Oats are gentle, consistent, and supportive in a way that most survival staples are not. They also contain iron, magnesium, and B vitamins that rice simply does not provide in meaningful amounts. In terms of storage, rolled oats sealed in airtight containers away from moisture will stay good for 25 to 30 years. In terms of preparation, they can be cooked with water, eaten dry in an emergency, ground into flour for basic baking, or used as a thickener for soups and stews. They do not require complex cooking, they do not require special tools, and they do not require any specific climate to remain stable. If your emergency supply does not include oats, you are leaving a serious gap. 8. Canned fish, sardines, mackerel, tuna. What determines whether you stay mentally sharp and physically capable during an extended crisis is not just how many calories you are consuming. It is whether your brain and muscles are getting what they specifically need to keep working under stress. And most shelf-stable emergency foods cannot answer that. Canned fish can. Fatty fish like sardines and mackerel are among the densest sources of omega-3 fatty acids available in a shelf-stable format. Omega-3s are not optional extras for health. They are critical for brain function, inflammation control, and cardiovascular performance, all of which deteriorate rapidly under sustained physical and psychological stress. Protein in canned fish is high quality, meaning it contains all the essential amino acids your body cannot manufacture on its own. During World War II, canned fish was deliberately included in military rations not for variety, but because strategists understood that soldiers needed to stay sharp and functional over weeks of extreme duress. What works for people operating under battlefield conditions works for anyone navigating a sustained emergency. Canned sardines or mackerel properly stored can remain safe and nutritious for 4 to 5 years, sometimes longer. They require no cooking, no preparation, no water. Open the can and eat. In a situation where energy conservation matters, that simplicity is worth more than it might seem. 7. Multivitamins. This is the item you walk past every single day. It does not look like a survival food. It does not fill your stomach. You would never think to mention it when people ask what you have stored. And yet, this is the item that determines whether your body slowly holds together or quietly starts falling apart long after you feel like you have eaten enough. This is where the history of nutrition becomes genuinely uncomfortable. During the age of long ocean voyages, from the 1500s through the 1700s, sailors died in enormous numbers from a disease called scurvy. They had food, they had water, they had enough calories to keep going, but they lacked vitamin C, and without it, their bodies began to break down at a cellular level. Gums bled, joints failed, wounds stopped healing. People who had been perfectly healthy became completely incapacitated within weeks. The entire problem could have been prevented by something smaller than a fingernail. In modern survival situations, the timeline is different, but the biology is identical. Vitamin deficiencies do not announce themselves loudly. They accumulate quietly. Fatigue deepens, concentration narrows, immune function weakens, wounds heal more slowly. Small infections become serious problems. By the time you notice, the deficit has already been building for weeks. A single bottle of complete multivitamins can cover one person for 3 to 6 months. It takes up almost no space. It costs almost nothing relative to what it protects against. And it addresses nutritional gaps that no realistic combination of shelf-stable foods can fully fill. Do not think of multivitamins as a supplement to an already healthy diet. In an extended emergency, think of them as the maintenance system that keeps everything else functioning. Without them, you may have plenty to eat and still find yourself declining in ways you do not understand until the damage is already compounding. Store them. Keep them accessible. Rotate them before expiration. This is the most overlooked item in emergency preparedness. 6. Apple cider vinegar. Most people preparing supplies think almost exclusively about calories. What they rarely think about is the range of practical uses that extend far beyond simple nutrition. Apple cider vinegar is one of the few things you can store that pulls triple duty as a food preserver, a basic health tool, and a household utility. Vinegar has been used for preservation for thousands of years across dozens of cultures. Before refrigeration was ever conceived, people were extending the life of vegetables, proteins, and other perishables through acidic preservation. The principle still works exactly the same way today. In a situation where refrigeration is unavailable, the ability to preserve food through fermentation and pickling is not a nice-to-have. It is a meaningful survival skill. Apple cider vinegar with the mother, the unfiltered, unrefined version, also carries natural antimicrobial properties. It has been used across generations to soothe sore throats, support digestion during dietary stress, and clean minor surface wounds when more conventional options are unavailable. This is not folk mythology. It is documented historical use backed by a reasonable body of research on its antimicrobial characteristics. A few liters of apple cider vinegar, properly sealed, will remain stable and useful for years without any special storage conditions. The ratio of utility to storage space is extraordinary. Are you thinking about how many different problems one item can solve? Because in a constrained situation, that kind of thinking is what sets prepared people apart. 5. Dark chocolate with high cocoa content. If you are dismissing this before you finish reading, you are missing the point. Survival is not purely a physical equation. It has a psychological dimension that most people completely ignore until it becomes their biggest problem. And dark chocolate, in a very practical way, addresses both sides of that. At the physical level, dark chocolate with 70% cocoa or higher is genuinely calorie-dense, roughly 550 to 600 calories per 100 grams, with a meaningful amount of healthy fat and magnesium. Magnesium is a mineral that most people are quietly deficient in even under normal circumstances. Under stress, the body burns through it even faster. Magnesium supports muscle function, nerve regulation, sleep quality, and dozens of other physiological processes that all become more critical when conditions are difficult. At the psychological level, there is something that extended darkness and uncertainty does to people. Morale collapses, hope erodes, the will to keep going becomes fragile. Militaries have understood this for centuries. Treats and small comforts are not luxury items when people are operating under sustained pressure. They are strategic tools for maintaining function. A small piece of dark chocolate does not just taste good. It triggers neurochemical responses that reduce cortisol, lift mood, and provide a brief but genuine sense of normalcy. In a long stretch of difficult days, that matters more than most people are willing to admit before they have experienced it. Dark chocolate with high cocoa content, properly stored in cool, dark conditions, remains good for 2 to 5 years. It is the one item in your emergency supply that you will actually look forward to. 4. Instant coffee and tea. This might seem like comfort rather than necessity, but think about what actually happens to a person who is used to caffeine when it is suddenly removed entirely. Headaches arrive within 24 hours. Concentration drops noticeably. Mood declines sharply. None of these things are trivial when you are already navigating a stressful situation and need to stay alert and functional. Beyond the caffeine dependency angle, coffee and tea carry real utility. Tea, particularly green and black varieties, contains compounds with documented antimicrobial and antioxidant properties. In conditions where illness is more likely due to stress, exposure, and reduced hygiene resources, having something that actively supports immune function has real value. The act of boiling water to make tea also serves a practical sanitation function. It reinforces a safe water habit that matters when sources are uncertain. The psychological value, again, cannot be dismissed. The ritual of a warm drink, something familiar, something that signals a moment of pause, provides a degree of psychological stability that people underestimate until it is gone. Instant coffee stores for 20 to 30 years in sealed, airtight containers. Loose tea lasts nearly as long. Both take up almost no space. Both require only hot water. The return on storage investment is extremely high. 3. Honey. Here is a fact that genuinely surprises most people. Honey found in ancient Egyptian tombs, some of it over 3,000 years old, was still edible when archaeologists discovered it. Not metaphorically preserved, actually edible. The Egyptians did not place it in tombs by accident. They placed only things they believed carried real and lasting value beside the people they were honoring. Honey met that standard over 3 millennia ago. It still meets it today. Honey does not spoil because its chemistry does not support bacterial survival. It is too acidic. It has too little water. It produces trace amounts of hydrogen peroxide naturally. Bacteria simply cannot establish themselves inside it. This is not superstition or exaggeration. It is well-documented biochemistry. What makes honey especially valuable as a stored item is the range of things it can do that no other single food matches. As a rapid energy source, it is nearly instant. The body absorbs it faster than almost any other carbohydrate, which means in a moment of sudden exhaustion or blood sugar crash, a small spoonful produces a noticeable and fast recovery. No preparation, no cooking, no tool required. As an antimicrobial agent, honey has been applied to wounds for thousands of years across cultures that had no contact with each other, because independently, people observed that it worked. Modern research has confirmed the mechanisms behind that observation. In situations without reliable access to medical supplies, the ability to treat minor wounds and reduce infection risk has real consequences. If honey crystallizes, it has not gone bad. Gentle warmth returns it to liquid form instantly. It does not require rotation the way most stored foods do. You store it once and it simply remains. Mix it with water as a quick energy drink. Combine it with dry foods to make them more appealing and digestible. Use it to soothe a sore throat or calm a cough when pharmaceutical options are unavailable. There are things you store because you think you might need them. Honey is something you store because you absolutely will. 2. Sugar. There will be moments in a prolonged hard stretch where you do not need more nutrition. You need to not collapse in the next 10 minutes. Sugar is not a food that supports long-term health in the conventional sense. It lacks micronutrients. It does not build anything lasting. But as a fast-acting emergency fuel, nothing else works quite like it. The body does not need to process sugar the way it processes complex carbohydrates or proteins. The conversion to usable energy is nearly immediate. When someone experiences sudden physical exhaustion, blood sugar drop, dizziness, or shaking hands, these are not just discomforts. They are warning signs that control of the situation is about to be lost. A small amount of sugar, eaten directly, dissolved in water, or mixed into another food, can restore a functioning state faster than anything else you could reach for. That is a specific capability that almost nothing else in a survival supply replicates. Sugar also has preservation applications. Combined with fruit, it limits bacterial growth and extends usable life without refrigeration. It is not perfect preservation, but it buys time in a situation where every additional day of food security matters. An important principle that most people have never thought about. When you are simultaneously dehydrated and physically depleted, water alone will not restore you effectively. Combining a small amount of sugar with salt in water creates a rehydration solution that the body absorbs dramatically better than plain water. This is the basis of oral rehydration therapy used in medical emergencies worldwide. Sometimes survival is not about managing the next 30 days. It is about getting through the right hour. Sugar gives you that. 1. Water. You can go many days without food. The human body is remarkable in how long it can operate on reserves, but you cannot go more than a few days without water. And the most dangerous aspect of water dependency is that the crisis point arrives faster and more quietly than most people expect. Water is not a food in the caloric sense. It provides no energy of its own. But it is the medium through which everything else functions. Without water, you cannot cook rice, cannot prepare beans, cannot digest effectively, cannot regulate your body temperature, cannot think with full clarity. Every other item on this list becomes significantly less useful without water to activate it. But the critical problem is not whether water physically exists near you. In most scenarios, water is present in some form. The problem is whether the water available to you is actually safe to use. Contaminated water is in some ways worse than no water at all. You can see it, you want it, you need it. But drinking it will make you sicker faster than the shortage would have. And that is a uniquely demoralizing and dangerous position to be in. Do not only store water, store the means to make water safe. Boiling works, filtration works, water purification tablets work. Having multiple methods simultaneously is the most reliable approach because no single method covers every scenario. Understand that water safety is not something you simply have, it is something you create and maintain. And understand that without safe water, the most carefully assembled supply of food becomes largely inaccessible. Everything that requires cooking, everything that requires hydration, everything that requires mixing, all of it depends on this single resource. You do not need to be perfectly prepared to begin. You need to begin thinking differently than you do right now. When things are stable, preparation feels unnecessary. That is exactly the condition under which preparation has the greatest value, because you still have options, time, and access that you will not have once things shift. The people who are ready when hard moments arrive did not get there because they predicted specific events. They got there because they understood one principle. Time always benefits those who act before they have to. Every choice made now is a gap that does not have to be closed in a panic later. Not out of fear, out of control. If this gave you something worth holding on to, share it with someone who needs to hear it, like this video, and come back to my channel for more of what most people are not talking about